There are minds that never remember what silence feels like. Even when the world outside finally slows down, something inside keeps running. Thoughts collide, fears expand, memories repeat themselves like old echoes bouncing through a narrow hallway. Most people think that this is simply how life is now, fast, loud, overwhelming. But the truth is much sharper. A restless mind is not a symptom of the world. It is a symptom of a mind that has forgotten its own authority. The ancient Stoics lived in times of chaos, uncertainty, loss, war, and unpredictability. Yet they learned something that many of us have forgotten. Peace does not come from calmer circumstances, but from clearer thinking. They trained the mind the way a warrior sharpens a blade, slowly, consistently, intentionally, until inner stillness became a form of strength instead of a rare accident. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the noise inside you is optional, that your thoughts answer to you, not the other way around, that your emotional storms have a shape, a beginning, and an end, and that none of them have the right to rule your day. This isn't fantasy. It is discipline. It is training. And it begins with the ability to see your mind as something you operate, not something you endure. In this video, you will learn 8 Stoic secrets designed to give you back what the world quietly took from you. Clarity, direction, inner authority, and the capacity to stay grounded even when life shakes everything around you. These are not theories. They are practical mental tools, forged by people who understood human suffering long before our modern anxieties existed. Let's begin. Secret 1. Clarify your inner command before you face the day. Most people wake up and immediately surrender the steering wheel of their mind. Notifications, unfinished tasks, worries, comparisons, noise. The world enters before they even take their first conscious breath. And once the world enters first, the day becomes a reaction instead of a creation. The Stoics believed that the mind left without instruction behaves like an untrained horse. Strong, fast, full of potential, but wild enough to throw you off at the first unexpected movement. Clarifying your inner command means defining what your mind should follow before anything else has the chance to influence you. It is the practice of choosing your first thoughts rather than absorbing whatever appears. It's the difference between saying, "I hope today doesn't overwhelm me," and saying, "Today, I decide what deserves my attention and what does not." A mind without command clings to everything. Every fear, every rumor, every imagined scenario. A mind with command filters, chooses, and dismisses. It acts with intention instead of impulse. This clarity does not need grand rituals. It needs direction. A short sentence, a defined priority, a moment of awareness before the day begins. Anything that tells your mind, "You follow me," not the chaos. Without this inner command, the world becomes your master. With it, the world becomes background noise. Before we continue, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. I'm ready to take back control of my mind. Your engagement helps this message reach someone who is silently drowning inside their own thoughts and needs a reminder that calm is not something granted by luck, but something built through intention and discipline. Most people lose themselves because they forget that the mind is shaped by repetition. Whatever you feed it, it becomes. And the Stoics knew that if you want a stable mind, you must train it before life forces you to. This is where the next secret begins. Secret 2. The human mind carries far more weight than it needs to, and much of that weight is self-created. We assume the world is heavy, but in reality, we make it heavier by adding layers of interpretation to every small event. A simple delay becomes a personal failure. A neutral silence becomes hidden rejection. A harmless look becomes a threat. A minor mistake becomes evidence of inadequacy. Without noticing, we turn ordinary life into an emotional maze. The Stoics were masters at removing unnecessary mental weight. They learned to strip experiences down to what actually happened before letting the imagination interfere. And when you begin doing this, you discover something surprising. Almost nothing in your day truly contains the emotional charge you give it. Most of the pressure lives inside the narrative, not the event. The narrative is built from old fears, past wounds, insecurities, comparisons, expectations that were never met, and assumptions you've practiced for years. The mind becomes a projector, not a mirror. It doesn't show you reality. It shows you your fears painted onto reality. And when you live this way, everything feels personal, everything feels urgent, everything feels heavier than it needs to be. But the moment you pause and ask yourself, what are the actual facts here? A collapse happens inside the story. The imagined layers fall away, and what remains is usually something simple, manageable, and far less emotional. This is what clarity truly means. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of unnecessary interpretation. And once your mind stops creating extra weight, you begin to see that you are far more capable, far more grounded, and far less fragile than you believed. The world did not calm down, your thinking did. And that difference changes everything. Secret 3. Between what happens to you and what you do next, there exists a small, invisible space that most people never learn to see. It is the space where your instincts flare, where emotions rise, where impulses push, and where the old version of you tries to take control. But it is also the space where choice lives. For the Stoics, that space was sacred. They believed that if a person learns to expand it, even slightly, they unlock a level of power most people never touch in their entire lives. Because reacting instantly is easy, reacting wisely is mastery. And all mastery begins in that tiny pause. Most people collapse into their first emotion. Anger appears, and they snap. Fear appears, and they surrender. Sadness appears, and they withdraw. Pressure appears, and they break. Not because these emotions are too big, but porque their space between stimulus and response is too small. There is no room for thinking, no room for perspective, no room for a wiser self to intervene. Everything becomes urgent, everything becomes emotional, and everything becomes overwhelming. But when you strengthen that internal gap, your entire psychological landscape changes. You feel anger, but you don't become anger. You feel stress, but you don't break under stress. You feel fear, but you don't let fear choose your next step. Imagine what your life would look like if every reaction you've ever regretted had been delayed by 3 seconds. 3 seconds to breathe. 3 seconds to observe. 3 seconds to remember who you want to be instead of falling into who you were trained to be. Those 3 seconds are where transformation happens. And they are attainable, not through perfection, but through practice. You train that gap every time you pause before responding. Every time you choose silence over explosion. Every time you let the first emotional wave pass before acting. Over time, the gap grows wider. You become harder to provoke, harder to manipulate, harder to destabilize. You become someone whose calm cannot be stolen by anyone else's chaos. This gap is not weakness, it is authority. It is the quiet refusal to let the world decide who you are going to be in the next moment. It is the recognition that while you cannot control what happens, you can always control the meaning you give to it and the response you offer. And when you finally experience that level of control, something remarkable happens. Your mind stops feeling like a battlefield and begins to feel like a place you can live in without fear of being overwhelmed by your own reactions. This is what the Stoics meant when they said that freedom begins within, not when life becomes easier, but when your mind becomes disciplined enough to meet life without collapsing into impulse. Secret 4. One of the most misunderstood experiences in human life is discomfort. Most people treat discomfort as a warning sign, a message that something is wrong, that they should retreat, escape, or numb themselves until the feeling disappears. But the Stoics saw discomfort differently. They believed it was a compass, not a threat. Discomfort points toward what needs to be strengthened inside you. It exposes the parts of your character that remain untrained, the wounds you still carry, the fears you avoid, the habits you cling to because they offer a false sense of safety. People often pray for clarity, unaware that discomfort is the very thing trying to reveal it. What you fear in discomfort is not the sensation itself, but the meaning you have attached to it. You assume that the moment something feels difficult, it is a sign of failure, when in truth it is usually a sign of transition. Discomfort is the feeling of outgrowing an old version of yourself. It is the emotional friction that occurs when your potential begins pushing against your limitations. Without discomfort, growth would be impossible because you would remain trapped inside the borders of who you already are. The Stoics embraced discomfort as the first signal that transformation was beginning. They understood that if life never stretched you, it would also never strengthen you. The mind becomes resilient not by avoiding discomfort, but by learning to walk through it without panicking. When discomfort arrives, the first instinct is often to run, but the Stoics taught the opposite: pause. Sit with it. Observe it. The moment you stop resisting discomfort, it begins to lose its power. You notice that the emotion has edges, that it rises and falls like a wave, that it is not an endless force but a temporary response. You discover that your fear of discomfort was larger than the discomfort itself, and the more you face it, the smaller it becomes. Over time, you begin to recognize discomfort as a teacher. It reveals the parts of your life that require courage, honesty, boundaries, decisions, or discipline. It also reveals your strength, because every moment you endure discomfort without retreating is a moment where you prove to yourself that you are capable of more than you believed. Secret 5. One of the greatest reasons people feel mentally drained is that they leak energy in places that do not deserve it. You can spend an entire day doing almost nothing and still feel exhausted, not because of the tasks you completed, but because of the invisible emotional leakage happening inside you. The Stoics observed that most weakness does not come from heavy burdens, but from too many small, meaningless ones. A single insult consumes your thoughts for hours. A minor inconvenience ruins your mood. A small comment triggers insecurity. A stranger's opinion alters your self-worth. None of these experiences are large on their own, but when the mind gives them unlimited access, they drain energy slowly and silently. Human beings often underestimate how much mental strength is wasted on things outside their control. You cannot control what people think of you, but you spend hours imagining it. You cannot change the past, but you revisit it as if repetition could rewrite it. You cannot force someone to behave differently, yet you exhaust yourself trying to influence their choices. This constant attempt to dominate what is inherently uncontrollable weakens the mind. The Stoics believed that mental energy should be treated like a precious resource, given only to what truly matters and taken back from what produces no meaningful return. When you stop feeding situations that do not deserve your emotional investment, you begin to reclaim strength that you didn't even realize you had lost. Protecting your energy does not mean becoming distant or cold. It means becoming wise. It means refusing to throw your peace into every passing conflict. It means choosing your battles with intention rather than impulse. It means recognizing that not every negative emotion deserves a reaction, not every rude comment deserves attention, and not every fear deserves belief. When you develop this discipline, your mind becomes far clearer. You are no longer overwhelmed by small things porque you no longer allow them to enter your inner world. You become harder to provoke, not because you suppress emotion, but because you no longer attach your identity to every discomfort or every opinion that crosses your path. A protected mind is a powerful mind. It is a mind that is not thrown off balance by trivial events. It is a mind that understands its own worth so deeply that external noise cannot penetrate it. When you stop leaking energy into distractions, into past memories, into imagined fears, into other people's judgments, you suddenly have the strength to face the challenges that actually matter. This is what the Stoics meant when they said that clarity begins with subtraction. You do not become stronger by adding more to your life. You become stronger by removing what weakens you. Secret 6. One of the most overlooked causes of inner chaos is the speed at which we try to live. People assume they are struggling because life is difficult, but often they are struggling porque they are moving too fast to understand life at all. The mind was not designed to sprint from one demand to the next without moments of stillness. When everything feels urgent, when every small inconvenience feels like a crisis, when every task feels like a race against time, the nervous system begins to misinterpret ordinary life as a threat. And once your mind enters this state of constant acceleration, peace feels impossible. The Stoics knew the dangers of living too quickly. They believed that a mind in a hurry becomes shallow. It cannot perceive nuance. It cannot anticipate consequences. It cannot separate what matters from what merely makes noise. Imagine reading a profound sentence while running. No matter how meaningful the words are, the meaning slips through you because your pace does not allow for absorption. A rushed mind behaves the same way. It reacts quickly but understands slowly. It feels intensely but reflects weakly. It wants everything resolved immediately, leading to emotional exhaustion and poor judgment. Slowing down is not a luxury. It is a necessity for clarity. When you intentionally reduce your internal speed, you begin to notice patterns that were previously invisible. You see that many of your emotional reactions were not to the situation itself, but to the frantic pace you brought into the situation. A slow mind is not a lazy mind, it is a precise one. It gives you time to interpret rather than assume. It allows you to pause long enough to realize that what felt like a disaster was merely an inconvenience magnified by panic. You begin to understand that what overwhelms you is not the size of the moment, but the speed at which you enter it. A calmer pace creates a calmer mind. A calmer mind creates better decisions, and better decisions create a life that feels far less chaotic. Living slowly on the inside does not mean moving slowly on the outside. It means creating enough space between your thoughts so that reality can be understood rather than reacted to. It means approaching life with deliberateness instead of desperation. It means recognizing that clarity never comes when you are mentally sprinting. Clarity comes when your inner world finally stops tripping over itself. And once you learn to slow your inner rhythm, the world around you stops feeling like an endless emergency. You start to experience a kind of power that rushed people never touch, the power to remain composed while everything else moves quickly. That is the essence of Stoic pace, not slowness, but sovereignty. Secret 7. There are two kinds of silence in life: the silence you run from and the silence you grow inside. The first kind feels uncomfortable, like standing alone in a dark room with thoughts you'd rather avoid. It is the silence people try to drown with noise, distraction, entertainment, or constant stimulation. But the second kind of silence, the silence sought deliberately, is one of the most powerful tools of mental stability. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. They believed that a person who cannot face their own thoughts will always be controlled by them. Most people fill their days with noise not because they enjoy it, but because they fear what might surface in the quiet. Silence confronts you with unresolved emotions, with truths you hide from yourself, with memories that require healing, with desires you neglected, with the inner emptiness that distraction keeps numbed. But running from silence only gives those inner tensions more control. The Stoics approached silence not as a void, but as a sanctuary, a place where the mind reorganizes itself, where emotions settle into perspective, where internal storms lose their violence. In silence, everything that was blurred becomes defined. Everything that was overwhelming becomes understandable. Everything that felt uncontrollable reveals its shape. When you choose silence intentionally, you reclaim authorship over your inner world. You step out of the chaotic rhythm of external life and return to the center of yourself. It is in silence that you examine your motives without pressure, confront your weaknesses without shame, and rediscover your values without influence from the outside world. Silence is where you remember who you are, without noise telling you who you should be. And the more familiar you become with this inner quiet, the easier it becomes to navigate the turbulence of life. If noise is where the world shapes you, silence is where you reshape yourself. This deliberate silence also builds emotional resilience. Noise provides escape, but silence provides structure. It teaches your mind not to fear itself. It teaches you to see your emotions without drowning in them. It teaches you to observe your thoughts without believing every one of them. This ability becomes a form of armor, not coldness, not distance, but grounded awareness. A person who practices silence becomes harder to provoke, porque their reactions are no longer immediate echoes of the external world. They become considered, intentional, anchored. Silence sharpens intuition, deepens clarity, and strengthens emotional endurance. It is not passive, it is preparation. And once silence becomes part of who you are, you carry it with you even in noisy environments. The world may shout, but it no longer enters you with the same force. You respond from a deeper place, a steadier place, a place the Stoics believed was the true seat of personal power. Because the strongest people are not the ones who make the most noise. They are the ones whose silence cannot be shaken by the world. Secret 8. One of the greatest illusions that quietly steals a person's strength is the belief that peace will finally arrive once life becomes easier. People wait for the job to stabilize, for the relationship to improve, for the pressure to fade, for something external to fix the turbulence inside them. But the Stoics understood something far more realistic. Waiting for life to calm down is the fastest path to losing control of your mind. Storms don't stop because you ask them to. Chaos doesn't disappear because you wish for order. And circumstances do not rearrange themselves to match your emotional needs. Peace is not something you find when the world cooperates. It is something you build when the world refuses to bend. And the foundation of that peace is purpose. Purpose is not a dramatic mission or a grand destiny. It is the act of choosing a direction that matters more than your immediate comfort. Comfort promises relief, but only for a moment. Purpose promises difficulty, but it also promises transformation. When you repeatedly choose comfort, the mind becomes fragile. It becomes sensitive to the smallest discomfort, overwhelmed by the simplest challenge, destabilized by anything that requires effort. Comfort feels like safety, but it is often the slow erosion of resilience. It convinces you that ease is the natural state of life, and anything that disrupts that ease becomes intolerable. Purpose, on the other hand, strengthens the mind because it forces you to face the parts of yourself you would rather avoid. It disciplines your attention, sharpens your character, and teaches you to move through discomfort rather than negotiate with it. Purpose stretches you in ways comfort never will. It builds a kind of mental muscle that cannot develop in soft conditions. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort for this reason, not to suffer for the sake of suffering, but to ensure that they remained capable when life inevitably tested them. They understood that if you shield yourself from every difficulty, life will break you the moment it requires strength. But if you learn to endure small challenges deliberately, larger storms lose their ability to control you. Living with purpose does not mean rejecting pleasure or eliminating rest. It means refusing to let comfort become your compass. It means doing what cultivates your long-term strength rather than what satisfies your short-term feelings. It means getting honest about the ways you sabotage your own potential by choosing what is easy instead of what is meaningful. And it means recognizing that every time you choose purpose over comfort, you reinforce an internal foundation capable of carrying you through whatever life places in your path. Purpose does not make life painless. It makes you powerful enough to face life without collapsing. And when you live that way, peace ceases to be something fragile and becomes something deeply rooted. And now, reaching the end of these 8 Stoic secrets, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing about inner peace depends on a perfect world. It depends on the way you interpret what happens, the meaning you decide to assign to events, the thoughts you allow to grow, the habits you choose to cultivate, and the way you speak to yourself when the world is loud. Peace is a practice, a discipline, a form of inner architecture. It is not the absence of noise, but the ability to hold your center while noise continues around you. It is remembering that the world may be unpredictable, but your response does not have to be. It is understanding that the mind becomes what it rehearses, and most chaos is just the repetition of old patterns that no longer serve you. When you begin applying these principles, not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently, something in your internal landscape begins to shift. You stop living as a passenger inside your own head and start becoming its guide. You stop reacting to life as if everything is an emergency and begin responding from a place of awareness. You stop feeling overwhelmed by thoughts you never questioned and start choosing the thoughts you want to live with. You stop collapsing under emotions and begin navigating them like currents instead of storms. Slowly, quietly, your mind begins to trust you, and that trust is the birthplace of peace. People often think transformation happens in dramatic moments, but true change is built in silence, in the decisions no one sees, in the thoughts you challenge when you're alone, in the patterns you break even when they are familiar, in the strength you build even when no one applauds. A peaceful mind is not an accident. It is a decision repeated thousands of times, especially on days when it feels impossible. And when you finally reach that place where your emotions stop dragging you and your thoughts stop dominating you, you understand why the Stoics insisted that mastery begins within. The world has never been calm, but there have always been people capable of remaining calm inside it. That is the kind of person you are becoming. If this video helped you reflect more deeply, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which secret resonated with you the most, or which shift you are ready to make starting today. Your words may become the clarity someone else desperately needs. Stay steady, stay aware, and remember, the world does not decide your inner state. You do. And every day, in every moment, you have the chance to choose peace over panic, strength over weakness, and intention over impulse. This is how a strong mind is built, quietly, consistently, and from the inside out.